recorded right now, and there will be a video and presentation for the webinar available on WING's website and our YouTube channel as well. Also, about using WebEx events. If you lose your internet connection, you can just reconnect using the link sent to you by email. And also, if you need any help or have any questions, you can use the chat box on the right-hand side of the menu. Also, you can adjust and test your audio. Go into audio on the menu at the top, just clicking on speaker microphone audio test. All of you will be muted as soon as you join the meeting, so we avoid background noise. But if you have any questions at the end of the webinar, you can unmute yourself by clicking on the mic by your name on the list on the right-hand side. So just say a little bit about WINGS right now. We are an organization of a global mandate. We are right now in over 50 countries around the world. And we are a network of organizations serving philanthropy. So among our members, we have associations and networks as the China Foundation Center, and also organizations serving philanthropy in general as Sampradaan and the Hudson Institute. Our mission is to promote the development of philanthropy through mutual learning and sharing, and in opportunities such as this webinar right now. Webinar which features Yulya Spantchak. She's the Deputy Director of the Hudson Institute, and she was co-author of the report. And Pradeepta Nayak, Executive Director of the Sampradaan Indian Centre for Philanthropy, and Tao Ze is the Vice President for the China Foundation Center. And our presenters will make their presentations right now. Yulya and Pradeepta and Tao Ze in this order. And we'll open up for questions after that. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourselves, as I mentioned, or you can send us a message on the chat, and I can read it out loud to our presenters. So I'll pass it to Yulya from the Hudson Institute.
Thank you, Pradeepta, and I hope everybody can hear me. This is my first webinar.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Loud and clear.
Great. So thank you to Anna for organizing this, and for WINGS, of course, and to Pradeepta and Tao Ze, because we're all on different continents today, so it's good morning to some and good afternoon to others. And thank you for joining me. So today, as Anna mentioned, I will be discussing emerging economies. And this is data from our most recently published Index of Global Philanthropy and Remittances, the 2013 edition. And if you actually want to look at the publication, it's free to download on our website, which is globalprosperity.org. Or you can just email me and I'll send you a PDF. So I would like to start first by just going over, let me get to the next slide. Here we go. I just want to give a brief background on our research at the Center for Global Prosperity at the Hudson Institute. So if some of you don't know, but some of you probably do know, we aim to provide a more complete picture of economic engagement with developing countries. And for a number of years now, we've been reporting on investment, remittances, philanthropy, and ODA from the donor countries, from the DAC donor countries to developing countries. We are also probably most well known for our data on international philanthropy to developing countries. We were the first group to ever look at international philanthropy and its role in development. And now, our most recent index, we want to go beyond just looking at donor countries to developed countries. And so we decided to also include emerging economies in our data. And so this is super exciting for us. This is the first time ever we've done that. And for the 2013 index, we included Brazil, China, India, and South Africa in our report. So before I go into the emerging economy data, I want to give a brief background of what it is that we do for the U.S. Our data for the U.S. is by far the most complete, and I wanted to show you an example of what we strive to do for some of the other countries that we report on. So this is data for the 2011 data from the U.S. to developing countries. And the first line, as you can see, is official development assistance, and that's basically ODA, or what our government sends to developing countries, and that's at 30.9 billion. And if any of this is difficult to see, these charts are all in our actual publication as well. The second line is, that's where we come in, this U.S. private philanthropy to developing countries. That is the data that we've been striving to measure over the past, over 5 years now, almost 10 years. And as you can see, our philanthropy figure is 39 billion, which is actually larger than ODA. And we've also been able to separate it out, so we know how much philanthropy is from foundations, corporations, religious organizations, and so on. And so this is sort of the most complete example of international philanthropy that we have. And then the next line is remittances and private capital flows. Remittances from the U.S. to developing countries are over 100 billion, and private capital flows as well are quite large. So then the main point is just to look at the percentage line, and you can see that the U.S. economic engagement with developing countries is largely through private flows, right? So government assistance only makes up 11%, and remittances, philanthropy, and investment make up the majority of financial flows to developing countries. So now taking that and talking about emerging economies and what is their engagement with developing countries. So why did we choose to look at emerging economies? This is not news. I probably don't even need to go over the slide. Many of you, probably live in emerging economies and know that there's a growth in wealth, whether it's in the BRICS or the mints, and there's demographic and social transitions. And with these changes, there's the role that these countries are taking in global development is increasing every year. There's a growth in philanthropy, there's a growth in south-to-south migration, which results in greater remittances, and also investment. And so we decided that it was super important for us to try to now include emerging economies in both while we were looking at the donor countries, to also have emerging economies in our reports. So we tried to measure what I just reported for the U.S. Sorry, let me just go back to the slide. So ODA, philanthropy, remittances, and private capital flows. We tried to get the same numbers or the same data for emerging economies. And as you can imagine, philanthropy was by far the most difficult to get. So to get philanthropy data, we partnered with local groups in each country, and which is why we have the China Foundation Center today in Sampradaan to talk about data in China and India. But we tried to do the same thing for Brazil and South Africa to have, to basically be able to assess domestic and international philanthropy in these countries. So what does the data show? So this chart is in billions, but please don't get scared by the numbers. So I have a breakdown on the side, just like we did for the U.S., of ODA, philanthropy, remittances, and private capital flows. And for some reason, there's actually a line missing between philanthropy and remittances, two separate lines. So as you can see, ODA from the 4 countries, the total is measured out to about 3.7 billion, which is actually quite significant. Private philanthropy, which is the line underneath it, is about 370 million. So even though this is not, so again, this is to remind you that this is philanthropy from emerging economies to developing countries. So it's specifically international philanthropy. And as I mentioned, it's quite difficult to measure at this point. So it's very likely that this is an underestimate. We don't have the breakdown for foundations or corporations like we do for the U.S., just because that data is still difficult to get. But in the future, when we repeat, hopefully we can improve the philanthropy figures. Remittances are quite large, amounting to 14.2 billion from the 4 emerging economies. And then private capital flows are by far the largest, and this is your investment. And of course, the outlier here is China, with quite a bit of investment going into developing countries. So if you look at the total on the side, the way it adds up is actually quite similar to the kind of data that we have from the U.S. and other donor countries, where the majority of the engagement is through private flows, right? the government aid only makes up about 3%, while investment, remittances, and a little bit of philanthropy make up the majority of the flows from emerging economies to developing countries. So what, here are just some summaries so that we can get away from the pure numbers of it all. As I mentioned, the vast majority of financial flows from emerging economies to developing countries is through private channels, and less than 5% is government aid. Also, interestingly, when we compared the emerging economies to the other 23 DAC donors, the number of private financial flows made up 15% of all of the total flows from both donors and emerging economies. So I just want to make that clear because I think this is a very important point. Just the 4 emerging economies made up 15% of both donors, the 23 donors and the 4 emerging economies total flows to developing countries. So that's a disproportionate amount. So it's just arguments for why emerging economies need to be included in international development talk, because they do have quite a big stake in, and quite a big role in foreign financial aid. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, private philanthropy was by far the most difficult to measure. We were able to get ODA data from the OECD, we were able to get investment data for the IMF, and we were able to get remittance data from the World Bank. Philanthropy, just like it is difficult to measure in the US, it's difficult to measure in Europe, it's still difficult to measure in emerging economies. However, we have hope that, with sort of more infrastructure being built up, more intermediary organizations rising, it will be easier to measure in the future. And then corporate philanthropy was actually quite significant, particularly, in countries like Brazil and China, where corporate social responsibility is being pushed forward. So we saw a large role of corporate philanthropy in emerging economies. There's a more sort of involvement from the younger generation in philanthropy, and you see that everywhere, but particularly in emerging economies where maybe a history of formal philanthropy may not have been prominent. Now the new generation is stepping up to the plate, if you will. And then finally, the last bullet is that some of the, in the US, philanthropy started with these traditional family foundations. And you kind of see that, particularly in South Africa and other countries, where there's almost like you're jumping over traditional philanthropic means. There's more of these private nonprofit blends. There's more sort of social investment and social enterprises. So these new mechanisms for philanthropy are actually budding in emerging economies, which is very, very interesting. So this slide was really messed up. I'm not sure why that, I hope this is not messed up on your screen, but I can send people the PowerPoint. I'm not sure why, but so the first graph is the total private and public flows from both the donor countries and emerging economies. And so this is the total financial flows to developing countries. And the orange line represents the private flows, and the purple line is your government aid. So as you can see, private flows are far larger. They're almost 700 billion compared to about 138 billion in government aid. And then when you go to the chart that's breaking down those numbers, the orange line breaks down into investment, which is in red, remittances, which is in green, and philanthropy, which is in orange. So as you can see, investment is the largest, and this is again for all donors, including emerging economies, but it's also by far the most volatile, and that makes perfect sense. It's the most reactive to changes in economic conditions. Remittances is the slow and steady green line. It's, they're on the rise. They're basically immune to economic changes and are fairly steady and significant. The purple line is official development assistance, and that's their government aid. And the bottom line is philanthropy. And even though it's, a little bit, it looks really small compared to the others, it's pretty big. It's almost 60 billion, and you also have to take into account that it's probably a huge underestimate just because measuring philanthropy is so difficult. So next slide, I did want to show just a brief breakdown of the remittances, just because I think it's super interesting to see that south-to-south migration really does play a huge role in remittances. The top 23 countries are the donor countries and their remittance values. So again, this is remittances only to developing countries, yeah. But if you look at the bottom, we have the 4 emerging economies. Their remittances are very well comparable to the other donor countries. Again, showing that there's quite a bit of financial flows going from emerging to developing countries. Next slide. So with all of this in mind, there is, we like to talk about this new landscape of global private assistance. And it's interesting to see how how aid has changed going from government flows to private flows, but also within private flows, there's many changes. There's an increase in cause-related marketing. Of course, there's a huge increase in mobile giving, and we know this all with the typhoon, the number of social media campaigns that have launched up in the last week or so, and also crowdsourced funding. It's almost like we've finally figured out how to use social media in an effective way, which is really, really exciting. I think maybe even until this year, there was quite a lot of activism on social media, but not very much fundraising, and I think that's changing now and will in the future. Of course, there's your public-private partnerships, which have been around for a number of years now. Diaspora giving, and that's different than just remittances. Yeah, diaspora giving is when diaspora is actually engaged in international, it's more diaspora philanthropy. And then, of course, there's new financial mechanisms that go even beyond this in international development. And some of these financial mechanisms are seen in emerging economies even more so than they are in developed countries. And I just want to briefly go over some of these. So in the sort of the boring gray circle, you have your traditional philanthropy, right, which is your grantor to grantee. And now there's this new movement where the line goes both ways, right? There's more of an interaction between the grantor and the grantee. And that's through all of these kind of blend activities. So there's, program-related investing, which is of course done by foundations, but there's also impact investing and mission-related investing. Social responsible investing has taken on a huge role in the U.S. and abroad. And then there's social enterprises, cooperative. This chart doesn't even begin to sort of show the various kinds of mechanisms that are now in play in philanthropy. And it will be really interesting to see how they develop, specifically also in emerging economies. My next slide, these are more of our fun slides. In each index, and in this index as well, we like to highlight sort of stories of international philanthropy. And because in our 2013 index we focused on emerging economies, we had stories of philanthropy from each emerging economy. From China, we actually had 2 different projects that we talked about, and I'm just highlighting one of them. So this is just to show some of the ways in which Chinese philanthropists are being active in international philanthropy. There was a bunch of sort of high net worth individuals in China, and these are both CEOs of internet companies as well as artists, gathered together to start this fund for global conservation. And this was almost like a true form of philanthropy, where these individuals pooled resources together to try to do some conservation, specifically in Africa. And the project that we wanted to highlight was this antelope that has been going, endangered, and through the China Global Conservation Fund, these philanthropists were able to launch some of the sort of a conservation project in Africa and other regions to basically get the Hurula antelope back on track in terms of, getting it off the endangered species list and making sure that the species survives. And this was super interesting because it was, in every essence, a very pure philanthropy project from China. There's quite a bit of corporate social responsibility, but this was actually high net worth individuals gathering together and doing something active in Africa and outside of China. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I would like to go over maybe just one more project that I think would be interesting to some. I'm going to skip South Africa and go to India since we'll have Pradeepta talking. Another project that we wanted to highlight from India was this organization called SIWA, which is quite international, but it was started as a union, and it works sort of as for training women both in India and in other Asian countries. And most recently, one of their interesting projects was a SIWA Afghanistan project, where the members of SIWA, so Indian women, trained Afghanistan women or women living in Afghanistan on operating a business and on being able to do some of the management and the financial literacy. And then these women who lived in Afghanistan then sort of trained the other women in their own countries to also run a business and operate a business. And this was a really wonderful endeavor because it sort of took on this training of trainers, right? And was able to, the project has been successful. It's been applauded by, there's Hillary Clinton on the slide, but it's been applauded both in India and Afghanistan, of course, by international organizations as well. And again, this is just a great example of how an emerging economy is doing something outside of its borders for global development. I think I'm way past my 10-minute mark. So
you can go on, that's fine.
Oh, I can go on.
Brazil. Yeah, you can.
I just wanted to point out one more project from Brazil, and maybe I could go do all of them then if I have time. So let me just go back to the South Africa one that I skipped over before. So this is the hippo roller, and I absolutely love this project because this is a fabulous picture for one. But also the hippo roller, this is one of those blend organizations where it started out as it's a for-profit and a non-profit blend doing social good, essentially. These hippo rollers are a way to transport water. And originally they were made so that people in emerging economies and in developed countries can use it for gardening, essentially, because it's a very easy and simple way to transfer large quantities of water. But now what they've done is they can use the earnings that they make from selling the hippo roller at a for-profit rate and donate them and distribute them to countries where it's actually needed. So the South Africa project has been active in numerous countries across the African continent, again, where they're taking kind of the private earnings of selling the product and then pulling that in and building partnerships with other donors to make sure that this is available outside of South Africa and also to poor communities in South Africa where the transportation for water is needed. And I mean, the social venture aspect of it is super, super interesting to me, and I think to many other people who are listening, because it's just such a non-traditional way of doing philanthropy. And I think you can still call it philanthropy, if you will. And then the last one that I did want to go over was the Center for Digital Inclusion in Brazil. And this group has been around for a number of years. It was started by an Ashoka Fellow. And essentially, the sort of main goal of the Center for Digital Inclusion was to basically bridge the digital divide. In many cases, and you see this in the US even still, if people are not computer literate, it just makes their life a lot more difficult in terms of finding jobs and just being able to be an entrepreneur. And this same thing happens in emerging economies and developing nations. So in Brazil, the Center of Digital Inclusion started out by basically teaching people how to use technology. And this is they have both kids, there's kids on the slide, but they also do this for adults. And they have expanded dramatically. They don't just do this in Brazil now. They've launched these centers in Argentina and Chile all across South America, and also even in Europe. So thus far, they've been able to reach, almost 2 million people in order to sort of teach these individuals how to use technology for their own good, so that they can prosper economically in a more easier fashion, if you will. And I think that might be the end of my my presentation. And I think I'll hand it over to you, Anna. I'm not sure if Pradeepta, I think Pradeepta is next, so you can pass it on.
Yes, thank you very much for the great presentation, Yulya. I'm sure people have a lot of questions at the end. So, Pradeepta, could we talk a little bit about India?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly, loud and clear.
Okay. Also, hi everybody, good evening from India. This is Pradeepta Nayak from Sampradaan Indian Centre for Philanthropy. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be making this presentation and speaking to my fellow colleagues around the world. At the outset, I would like to thank Yulya and the Center for Global Prosperity, the Hudson Center, for inviting us in this endeavor. Thanks also are to Anna and the Wings for organizing this webinar, facilitating the spread of this important report on international philanthropy. However, I have been asked by Yulya to limit myself to philanthropy in India. To give a brief introduction of my organization, Sampradaan Indian Centre for Philanthropy works for a redefined and a recreated philanthropy to create a new society based on sustainable and inclusive human development. We define philanthropy different from charity. For us, philanthropy is charity plus. It involves wise or enlightened giving. It is informed and consented giving, facilitating effective and qualitative changes in the lives of the poor and needy. Our vision is a culture of compassion and caring society in which private resources of money, assets, time, and skills are shared willingly and used effectively to create a developed, equitable, and socially responsible society. Our mission is to re-establish philanthropy as a way of life by creating and maintaining an enabling environment for philanthropy. About philanthropy in India, I can say that philanthropy has been history and heritage of India, its culture and tradition. Our philanthropy can trace back to our ancient history and the Vedic times. India's ancient scriptures talk of the whole world as one family. And India's organized and professional philanthropy is as old as that of Carnegie and even before. In India, there is a high degree of charity and religious giving. People practice charity and religious donations mainly because of fear, devotion, and compassion. There is a lack of adequate research in India to reveal the magnitude and potential of the entire philanthropic stories, thought, and practices. There have been philanthropists who have been working in places not known to the mainstream and professional philanthropy. India's philanthropy has been both individual and institutional, community and corporate. There are public foundations besides individual, family, and corporate-based philanthropic entities. Indian government has also guided philanthropy by channelizing corporate contributions as corporate social responsibility. Corporate philanthropy is evolving in a big way with the amendment of the Companies Act that makes CSR mandatory. The Companies Act 2013 mandates companies with a net profit of more than 50 million Indian rupees or a net worth of more than 5,000 million rupees or a revenue of more than 10,000 million Indian rupees to earmark at least 2% of the average net profits of the preceding 3 years of CSR activities. I think Carmen Perez, who is listening, must be knowing this. This amendment to the Companies Act provides more transparent reporting of corporate donations. This is expected to play the role of a game changer in development scenario, with the investment of big money from the corporate houses, foundations, and the billionaires. The recently released Hudson report showed India's emergence in economic and philanthropic scenario. India is ranked 6th in a list of top 10 countries with most billionaires. The number of billionaires in India is higher than that of Hong Kong, France, Saudi Arabia, and Switzerland altogether. Hudson report finds 141 individuals with $300 million US or more, and 101 individuals saw their wealth increase or retain compared to last year. The total wealth of India's top 100 increased to $250 billion US from $221 billion US compared to last year. 46 new millionaires found entry in the coveted list with a cutoff mark of $300 million US. Hudson India Philanthropy list of 2013 ranked 31 Indians who donated more than 100 million Indian rupees, equivalent to 1.6 million US in cash or cash equivalent during the financial year 2012 and 2013. It puts IT Titan Hudson Plenty as the most generous Indian with a donation of 80,000 million Indian rupees in the past year, that is 2012. These donations have a huge contribution to India's development. Indian philanthropists donate to a variety of subjects of development. As per the recent report, education was the most important area for the Indian philanthropists, with a total contribution of 122,000 million rupees. It was followed by social development, healthcare, rural development, environmental causes, and agriculture, and other subjects. Organized community philanthropy is a recent phenomenon in India. There are efforts to work on promotion of community philanthropy and development of community foundations. There are more than 16 community foundations in India now, and about 100 community funds established by small, rural, local communities. There are also more than 100 registered NGOs that are interested to work on community philanthropy. To democratize philanthropy, there are efforts to promote philanthropy not only among the general populations, but also among different segments of society in a focused way. For example, there are initiatives to promote philanthropy among women. In India, there are a lot of self-help groups or SHGs established by women. They do different kinds of income generation activities, including pooling of funds for profit. We are working to promote philanthropy among women by converting their saving circles to giving circles, so that they share a part of their profit for the non-members and the rural community. We are also working on school philanthropy among the young people. The other aspect India needs to work is on promotion of everyday philanthropy by the general public. Sorry. With their help to their neighbors and their kindness to the strangers. We are also working on new concepts like the stone of philanthropy, the chain of philanthropy, philanthropy as an infection, and giving gives back. However, there are many challenges like poverty, politics, religion, caste, ignorance, dependence, and the lack of transparency, accountability, credibility, and leadership that have been threatening the growth of philanthropy in general. However, one thing that has not evolved with the emergence of Indian economy is international philanthropy. Our study, in partnership with the Center for Global Prosperity, shows only 3 major contributions to causes of international significance. Even these contributions have not been appreciated well by Indian public. The debate is that India is entrapped by a dangerous combination of increasing economy and inequality, and facing depleting external funding. The situation needs much more money for India because of its continuing poverty and other pressing needs. The public opinion, though against international philanthropy, promotes community philanthropy within India. I would like to conclude by saying that India at present is a country that combines global philanthropy in spirit and local philanthropy in action. Thank you very much for listening.
Hi.
Yes?
Thank you very much, Pradeepta, for the Yes. Thank you very much for the great presentation. Yes, perfectly.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, and for the very impressive numbers on India. That's great to hear. And now we can go to China with Tao Ze. Tao Ze, can you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, maybe you could speak a little bit louder.
So this is Tao Ze from the China Foundation Center. Thank you for the invitation from Win. I will spend about 5 minutes to talk about some key numbers of China Foundation sector.
Hi, Tao Ze, could you try to maybe speak a little bit louder? We can't hear you very well. It's a bit low.
Is that okay right now?
Oh, it's better.
Better. Okay. So I will spend about 5 minutes to talk about some key numbers in the foundation sector in China. So here is the first slide. This chapter explains the development of Chinese foundation sector. So we can see the first Chinese foundation was established in the 1981. And by today, we have over 3,442 foundations. The number of Chinese foundations was affected by the policy from the central government. So the milestone of the Chinese foundation development in the history is in 2004. Our central government published a new regulation on foundation management. They try to use this new regulation to encourage the rich individuals and the corporations to giving back to the society after being rich people and corporations. And then I want to share the top 10 fields of interest of all the Chinese foundations. We can see, according to the China Foundation Center database, we do some analysis on over 3,400 Chinese foundations. Over half of them, they do some projects in the education field. So education means they offer some scholarship for the students, or they try to build some school or rebuild some facilitation of the school. The second popular topic is the poverty alleviation, and the third one is the scientific research. Even though the environmental issue is very popular, but from our data analysis, the environmental issue is not in the top 10 list of field of interest of Chinese foundations. And then the third slide talk about how big the Chinese foundation sector is. By the end of last year, 2012, we have over 3,000 Chinese foundations, registered Chinese foundations. The total net assets is by US dollars is 12 billion US dollars. The annual income is 6 billion US dollars, and the annual giving and the program expenditure is 4 billion US dollars. It's compared to the United States, the Chinese foundation sector is still very small, but it's developed very fast. Every year, we have about 500 new foundations registered. Then the last slide is called the China Foundation Transparency Index. Because the Chinese foundation sector developed very fast, so as a working platform, China Foundation Center try to build a very solid infrastructure for the development of Chinese foundation sector. So we try to use this transparency index to set up an industry standard for all the Chinese foundations to disclose their information to the general public, to build a trust relationship between the foundation, between the charity, and the public and the society. So we identify the 60 key indicators, like the name of your chairman, the name of your the CEO, or your annual income, annual expenditure, your auditing report, or the donor list. This kind of 60 indicators, and put into our database. Every week, our IT system will review the database to calculate how many indicators each foundation discloses to the public. And then, according to the score, we rank over 3,000 Chinese foundations according to their transparency. So we try to use this new website. You can go to this website, the www.fpi.org.cn, to review our transparency index, and also our methodology, evaluation methodology and the indicators are totally open to all the public. So it's very easy for the foreigners and some donors to review this index, to review the ranking, and then after that to make informed decision making when they want to donate to any foundation or any charities. So far, this methodology is very efficient and accepted by the most of the Chinese foundations. They try to use the indicator to disclose the information more professionally. And in the future, we hope we can promote this index to more foundations and to really build a strong infrastructure and win the credibility and accountability of all the Chinese foundations. So here's a brief introduction about the China foundation sector. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Tao Ze. Thank you very much for your presentation. And we're opening up for questions. And we already have one for you, actually. Carmen Perez from CCP in New York is asking if you know how many of the private foundations are corporate in China, and if companies set up foundations to conduct philanthropy.
Yes. So let's go back to the first slide. We can see we have on the top we have in total number and the public foundation and the private foundation. So most of the public foundation means they do fundraising, so it's kind of public charity. The private foundation, generally speaking, is a kind of built up by some company or some individual or some university to with an endowment. So far, according to our statistics, about 600 Chinese foundations, they are kind of corporate or corporate-related foundation. It's become very popular for the corporation to build up a foundation as a professional vehicle to giving back to the society.
Oh, that's great. 600 is quite a huge number. Thank you, Tao Ze. And
My pleasure.
A question from Pradeepta, and also I'd like to remind you that you can always unmute yourselves and ask the questions, not just through the chat box. And there's a question from Pradeepta actually for you. What is Samaritan as a field of interest?
Say it again.
Sorry, oh, so now we can.
Just say it again.
What is Samaritan? That's after culture. What is it? What does it mean?
It means some of about the healthcare.
And can you repeat that?
It's a kind of healthcare or some like some clean water, some project related with your health.
Okay, a kind of health related.
Yeah.
Giving. And thanks. And are there any other questions? Okay.
Sorry. Hi, this is Yulya. I unmuted myself. I was actually hoping that maybe Tao Ze could talk just a little bit more about the difference between public and private foundations in China, and just expand a little bit more on that.
So in China, foundation is a legal term. So it's very easy for us to identify which one is a foundation, which one is from NGO, other NGO. According to the Chinese regulation, when you go to the government office to register a foundation, you have two options. One is a public foundation, one is a private foundation. Public foundation means you have the right authority to do public fundraising. You don't need an endowment. You can raise funds from the general public or from other companies. But as a private foundation, you must have an endowment. So you have to spend your money every year. It's kind of have some payout rate. In China, if you have a private foundation, every year you have spent 8% of your total assets in the end of the last year. But as a public foundation, the number is you must spend 70% money you raised last year. So that's the biggest difference between the public foundation and the private foundation in China.
And also, Tao Ze, there's a question for you on asking why environment is not on the list of fields of interest, if there is a reason behind that.
So one biggest reason is you can see the environment issue is hard to do fundraising. So lots of Chinese foundations, they do fundraising, but the environment is it's very hard to explain how important it is for the public. So, but compared to the environment issue, it's very easy to persuade a donor to donate to build up a school or to give a scholarship for the students. So right now, most of the Chinese foundations still work in some traditional practice.
Thanks, Tao Ze. And we have a question from Sarah Hannon of the Development Initiative. And Sarah, maybe would you like to ask your question here live? Or should I read it from the chat?
So, hi, can you hear me? It's Sarah?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. Thanks, Anna. Yes, my question was from Yulya. I work at Development Initiative based in the UK, and we're really interested in the Center for Global Prosperity research. And looking at the numbers, we can see that some of the economic engagement with developing countries will include some spending that is actually spent in the emerging economy or donor countries, such as the administrative cost of non-profit organizations, or perhaps volunteers that are volunteering in a country like the United States or Brazil on behalf of developing countries. So these amounts would actually include some share that is not transferred out of the donor country or the emerging economy, but spent on behalf of the developing countries. And I'm wondering if you might have an estimate of how much that is. So money that might be spent in a donor country on behalf of another country, or what share that represents in the total spending.
Question. It's a very good one. So, of course, just like if you look at government aid, there has been quite a bit of criticism in the past. I think now with more transparency, it's a little bit better. But, with government aid, the criticism was that a lot of it especially if you look at the US model, basically geared at the sort of contractors that are around DC who, eat up a lot of the actual aid internally on, whatever fees that they use, and then a small percentage of it actually reaches the country. And, we assume that there is at least some of that happening as well with private aid, probably in the sense that, yeah, of course, there's administrative costs for NGOs, but we don't have a value on that, but we do think that it's more efficient, if you will, than government aid. And more efficient means we do think that a larger portion of it actually gets to the recipient if you compare it strictly to government aid. And the reason for that is, if we look at the U.S. sort of philanthropy flows, a lot of that number is foundations, which is, a small percentage of that number is foundations, and the corporate number is actually quite large. And a lot of that is actually measuring how much sort of goes in medical donations to developing countries, and that's fairly, legitimate in the sense that that is actually, most of that value actually reaches the developing country, in my opinion. And then also, if you look at religious organizations, a lot of that is, what they spend abroad. So I don't have a good estimate on that because it's really, really hard to measure, and I don't know how. We would need much more funding in order to be able to do that. But I think I would argue, as well as Carol Edelman, who's the director of the center, that private aid is more efficient and a larger portion of it reaches the donor compared to government aid. But that's definitely a place where we would need to do more research.
Anna, hi, this is Karolina Mzyk, and I have a question for Yulya. Can I go on?
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Yulya. This is Karolina Mzyk, and I work at UN Development Program, and I'm responsible for foundations. And I wanted to thank you very much for an interesting presentation. And my question relates to data. And I wanted to get your views on what do you think is a capacity of philanthropic foundations to adhere to a monitoring and reporting standards that would be aligned or could be aligned with any of the multilateral or global reporting, and so that we could have a better understanding of what is a contribution of philanthropy also in developing countries in global development. And maybe you could give us an example. I mean, for example, right now at UNDP is hosting a secretariat for IATI, which is the International Transparency Initiative. And there is a number of foundations such as Gates and Hewlett, for example, that committed themselves to report towards IATI, and we thought it was a great step forward to actually have a better understanding of what's going on in the philanthropic world. But then the questions that we have internally here is, what is the capacity of smaller foundations to also follow the suit? And if not IATI, then what other possible ways could we have to better to encourage foundations to report back? Thank you.
And I'm very happy that you brought up IATI. It's a wonderful initiative, and the number of foundations that are joining are increasing. There's also, I was recently in DC at the aid data launch, which I'm sure you know about. It's a great way to sort of see how much money is out there. In terms of reporting, so it's a question of capacity, which you mentioned. So obviously larger foundations like Gates and Hewlett have the capacity to report and to measure, and so they can do that. And what does capacity mean? At the end of the day, a lot of it is staff and, having the time to actually go beyond, to self-evaluate and make it public. I think traditionally, I think if you compare foundations today to foundations 50 years ago, the way foundations operate today is much more transparent than it used to be. In terms of getting smaller foundations to participate in this, that is a challenge, but I think it's almost like once the tide kind of gets going, it will be almost like, almost like a baseline where you kind of have to do at least a little bit of reporting in terms of what you're doing abroad. Also, and I hate to sort of give the cliche answer, but I do think technology plays a really big role. I think with IATI, that's definitely a step. With aid data, it's also a step. I think the more intermediary organizations that you have outside of foundations that will be willing to kind of do some of the legwork for foundations in terms of reporting will then encourage foundations to participate in that. With IATI, I'm not sure what their reporting mechanisms are, but from my understanding, foundations have to be active in doing it themselves. I think if you get intermediary organizations to be a little bit more active in doing that legwork, it will increase transparency in the end. So I hope that answers it a little bit.
Yes, this was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yulya. Are there any other questions or comments from any of you? And of course, you can always contact us at Wings or one of our presenters, and we can put you in touch and connect you, so you can ask your questions.
Ina, this is Yulya. I actually have one question for Pradeepta that I would really like him to touch on, and I think he mentioned this earlier. You know, there's a lot of barriers in India. He mentioned international philanthropy in India, and it's really difficult because there's obviously problems in the country, and so you want philanthropists to focus on the poverty that's there. But there's also sort of quite a bit of government restriction in terms of getting flows from India, you know, philanthropic flows from India to other countries. And I was just wondering if you could maybe comment on that, Pradeepta, or just mention, you know, if that affects international philanthropy at all.
Yes, well, you are very much right. The government is actually becoming stricter so far as the exchange of, you know, monetary flows, you know, either to India or from India is concerned, because no, there are so many protests, so many problems, so many issues that money coming from
And Pradeepta? I don't think we can hear you.
Lost Pradeepta.
Oh, yeah, I think so. And oh, it's a shame because it was our last question, because we're running out of time here. But then again, you can also contact Pradeepta, ask the question. And I'd like to thank you so much, all of our presenters, Yulya, Tao Ze, and Pradeepta. The presentations were great and very informative about emerging economies. I'd like to ask if you have any final comments.
I would just like to say thank you also, and thank you to our research partners, obviously the China Foundation Center and Sampradaan. It was really a wonderful initiative. This is our first time trying to look at philanthropy in emerging economies. And if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I do urge folks to read our report and, you know, give us any feedback. Much appreciated always. Thank you, Anna.
Oh, thank you, Yulya. And Tao Ze?
Yes, I think this kind of webinar organized by WINS is really important. For example, I have already read the report of Yulya, but I didn't find these two important tables. So it's really nice for me to listen Yulya's presentation and to catch the key points. So in the future, we hope we can have this kind of communication maybe more often. Thank you for Yulya.
Oh, thanks, Tao Ze. That's great feedback, and it's always good to actually get to talk to the person who wrote the report and was involved on it,
Yeah.
and to get to know their point of view on it. Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much, all of our participants. It was a great webinar. And I'd just like to emphasize that you can always send us questions about the webinar, and that it's going to be on WINC's website, that's wincsweb.org, and also on our YouTube channel that is also available from our website. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day or evening for some of you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.